Hello and welcome, dear listeners. Today's story is called The Locked Chapter, written by Amjad. If you're someone who wants to speak better English, understand English stories easily, and enjoy some really cool plots, then this story is just for you. Now, let's begin the story. Sarah was married to a famous writer named Michael Carter. Michael was smart, quiet, and always working on his books. He had written many bestsellers, books that sold millions of copies. But something strange had started to bother Sarah. Michael had a study room, a small room where he wrote his books. It had a strong wooden door, and it was always locked. Every time Sarah walked past it, she felt nervous. Why was the door always locked? What was he hiding inside? She asked Michael once, "Why do you keep it locked all the time?" He smiled and said, "It helps me focus. No distractions." Sarah nodded, but her heart felt heavy. She felt like he was hiding something from her. Days passed, then weeks. Michael spent more and more time inside that room. He hardly spoke. He didn't laugh anymore. And every night, she heard the sound of typing, tick, tick, tick. All night. One day, Michael left for a book event out of town. He would be gone for 2 days. Sarah stood in front of the locked door. She looked at the shiny lock. Her heart was beating fast. She whispered to herself, "I have to know what's inside." She picked up a small hairpin. Her hands were shaking, and slowly, she picked the lock. Click. The door opened, and what she saw inside was the beginning of something terrifying. Sarah slowly stepped into the study. The room was very quiet. Dust floated in the air. It was a small room, but everything inside looked neat. The table was clean. The chair was pushed in. There was only one lamp on the table, and it was still on even though it was morning. On the table, Sarah saw a stack of papers, neatly placed, like someone had just finished writing. She looked closer. The first page had a title written in bold letters, "Our Story, Chapter 1. Sarah felt a strange chill on her skin. She picked it up and started reading. The story was about a man named Martin and his wife Sophie. They were happily married. The story was simple at first. It spoke about how they met, how they fell in love, and how they got married. But soon things started to change in the story. Martin became busy with his work. He was a writer just like Michael. He stopped talking much to Sophie. He spent all his time in his study. Sophie became curious. She started feeling alone. She began to wonder what her husband was hiding. Sarah stopped reading for a moment. Her hands were shaking. The story felt too familiar. She turned to the next page. In the story, Sophie opens the door to the study when Martin is away. Just like Sarah had done now. She finds a story. And in that story, Martin writes about Sophie's death. The ending is clear. Sophie dies in an accident. But in the story, Martin does not seem sad. He seems calm, almost like he knew it would happen. Sarah looked back at the table. There were more papers under the first story. She picked the second set. The title this time said, Chapter 2, The Bath. Again, the story began the same way. A writer and his wife. A locked room. A quiet house. But in this one, the wife dies in a bathtub, slips, hits her head, and drowns. Again, the writer is not surprised. He simply continues his work. Sarah dropped the papers. Her mind was spinning. Each story was different, but the people were the same. A man like Michael, a woman like her, and every story ended with the wife dying. She opened more of the pages. There were 6 stories, all the same pattern, different deaths. One in a car accident, one falling from stairs, one by poisoning, and then the last paper, just one sheet. It had only a few lines, written in Michael's handwriting. Sarah read it slowly. Now that you've read these, which ending shall we try first? Sarah felt her knees become weak. She sat down on the chair. The room felt colder now. She looked around again. The walls had small photos of her and Michael, smiling, laughing, on holidays, on their wedding day. But now every smile in those photos felt strange. Sarah tried to think clearly. Was this just fiction? Just stories? Michael was a writer. Writers make up things. Maybe this was all part of a book. But then, why had he locked the room? Why were all the stories about her? And why so many deaths? She remembered how cold his voice had become in the last few weeks. How he avoided her questions. How his eyes didn't look the same anymore. Sarah stood up and walked slowly out of the room. She locked the door again. She went to the living room and sat on the sofa. She had to decide something. Should she wait for Michael to come home? Should she ask him what all this means? Or should she leave before he comes back? Her heart was full of fear. But one thing was clear. This was not just writing. Something was very wrong. Sarah stayed on the sofa for a long time. She didn't move. Her hands were cold, and her mind was full of noise. She looked at the clock. Michael would return tomorrow. She had less than 24 hours to think. Her first thought was to call someone, maybe her sister or her friend Emma. But what would she say? That her husband had written stories where she dies in different ways? That he left her a message asking which death she preferred? It sounded crazy. Maybe they would think she was imagining things. Maybe they would laugh. But it wasn't a dream. She had read the stories. She had seen the papers. She knew what she saw. Sarah stood up and walked to the kitchen. She needed water. As she drank, her hands were still shaking. She looked at the knife stand near the sink. All the knives were in place except the largest one. That one was missing. She stared at the empty slot. Her stomach turned. Maybe it was in the dishwasher? Maybe Michael used it for cooking and forgot to clean it? She opened the dishwasher. It was empty. She opened the drawers. No sign of the knife. Sarah closed the drawers and leaned on the counter. One knife missing. A house full of silence. A study full of stories where she always dies. She tried to calm herself. Maybe it's nothing, she whispered. Maybe it's just a story idea. Just fiction. But deep inside, she didn't believe that anymore. She walked to Michael's wardrobe, slowly opened the doors. Everything was neatly arranged: shirts, pants, jackets. She opened the drawer at the bottom. Inside there was a small box. She had never seen it before. It was black with a silver lock. No key. She tried to open it, but it didn't move. She looked closer and saw small letters written on it. The end begins at home. Sarah didn't know what that meant. Was it a clue? A password? A warning? She put the box back. She was breathing heavily now. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat in bed, the lamp on, waiting, listening. Every sound in the house felt louder. The wind outside, the ticking of the clock. 3 a.m., she got up again. She walked back to the study. This time, she didn't go inside. She just stood at the door and looked. She remembered the stories, each one different, but the ending always the same. She whispered to herself, "Is he planning something?" Then her eyes fell on something new. On the small table near the window there was a notebook. She hadn't seen it earlier. Maybe it was hidden under the papers. She picked it up and opened it. The first few pages were blank. But then she saw dates, notes, small details about her life. What time she woke up, what time she cooked, what she liked to eat, where she went every Monday. He had written everything about her routine, every little thing. Then on the last page it said, target date, October 18th, location, kitchen, method, fall or slip, explainable. Sarah dropped the notebook. October 18th. That was tomorrow. Her heart was pounding. She ran back to her room, locked the door, and sat on the floor. Now she was sure. Michael was not just writing. He was planning. She had to get out. But how? Should she run now at night? Should she call the police? Should she wait and talk to him face to face? Her mind was full of questions. Her body was full of fear. And outside the house the wind kept blowing, cold and sharp, like something was coming closer. The morning light came slowly. The sun rose, but Sarah had not slept at all. She sat on the bedroom floor, leaning against the door. Her eyes were tired, but her mind was still racing. She kept thinking about the stories, the missing knife, the notebook with all her daily habits, and the date written clearly, October 18th. Today. She stood up and walked to the window. The street outside was quiet. A few cars passed by. Some people walked their dogs. Everything looked normal. But inside her home, nothing felt normal anymore. Sarah took a deep breath and unlocked the door. She needed to act, not just sit and wait. She walked slowly to the kitchen. Her eyes went straight to the floor, the place written in the notebook. She imagined slipping there, hitting her head. It would look like an accident, just as Michael had planned. She checked her phone. No messages, no calls. She thought about calling the police. But what would she say? There was no proof of any crime. Just stories, notes, and fear. She hadn't been hurt yet. Then she had an idea. She would record everything. If anything happened to her, someone would know the truth. She opened the voice recorder on her phone and started speaking softly. My name is Sarah Miller. If you are hearing this, it means something has happened to me. I found stories in my husband's study. Stories where women like me, wives like me die. Each one ends with the wife's death. There is a notebook with all my habits written inside. And one page says, "I will die today in the kitchen. I am afraid. I don't know if he's planning something or if it's all just in his head. But if anything happens, please know I didn't fall by accident. I didn't slip. Someone planned it." She saved the recording and sent it to her sister and to her best friend Emma. Then she packed a small bag, just her wallet, phone charger, and some clothes. She decided to leave the house, at least for the day. But before she left, she took one last look at the study door. She walked to it, opened it, and took photos of all the papers. Every story, every note, every page. She sent them to herself and to Emma. Then she stepped out of the house. As she walked down the street, she kept looking back. She expected Michael's car to suddenly appear, but the road stayed empty. She reached a cafe and sat at a corner table. Ordered tea but didn't drink it. Her phone buzzed. A message from Emma. "What the hell, Sarah? Are you okay? Where are you?" Sarah replied quickly. "I'm safe for now. Can you come? I'll tell you everything in person." Emma replied within seconds. "Yes, coming now. Stay where you are." About 30 minutes later, Emma arrived. Her face was full of worry. She hugged Sarah tightly. Sarah whispered, "Thank you for coming. I didn't know who else to call." Emma sat beside her and said, "Tell me everything, from the beginning." Sarah told her everything. About the locked study, the stories, the missing knife, the notebook, the date. Emma listened without speaking. Her eyes grew wide as Sarah went on. When Sarah finished, Emma looked at her and said, "This is serious. You can't go back home. Not alone. Maybe not at all." "I know," Sarah said. "But what if I'm wrong? What if he's just writing a book?" Emma shook her head. "No writer hides this from his wife. And he wrote your routine, the exact day, the place. That's not just writing. That's planning." Sarah nodded. "What should I do?" "We'll go to the police," Emma said. "You already have some proof. Maybe they won't arrest him yet, but they'll take it seriously. And we'll make sure someone watches the house." Sarah looked out the window. The day had become bright and busy, but inside her heart, there was still darkness. She never thought she would fear the person she once trusted the most. Her husband, her partner, the man she loved. But now love had turned into something else. Into doubt, into danger, and maybe into survival. Sarah and Emma drove straight to the nearest police station. Sarah held the folder of printed stories and the notebook in her lap. She had also brought her phone, with the voice recording and photos from Michael's study. As they reached the station, Sarah felt nervous. Her hands were shaking again. She looked at Emma and said, "What if they don't believe me?" Emma replied, "Just tell them the truth. That's all you can do." Inside, the police station was quiet. A female officer at the front desk asked how she could help them. Sarah took a deep breath and said, "I think my husband is planning to kill me, and I have proof." That sentence made the officer pause. She stood up and called someone else. A few minutes later, Sarah and Emma were sitting in a small room with two detectives. One was older and calm, the other was younger and seemed alert. Sarah told them everything. From the locked room to the stories to the missing knife and the note with the target date. She showed them the photos on her phone and gave them the folder. The older detective, Detective Harris, looked at the stories. He read one of them quickly, then flipped through the others. After a few minutes, he looked up. "These are very detailed," he said. "But technically, they're still fiction. Has your husband ever hurt you before?" Sarah shook her head. "No, never." The younger detective, Detective Reed, looked more interested. He asked, "Can we visit your house? Just to see the room and the things you mentioned?" Sarah agreed. Emma offered to come along. The officers followed them in their car. When they reached the house, everything looked quiet. Sarah opened the door and led them in. She showed them the study. All the papers were still there. The detectives walked around the room. Harris picked up the notebook and read through the pages. Reed opened the drawers and found the small black box Sarah had mentioned. He examined it closely. "The end begins at home," he read out loud. "Creepy message." They checked the kitchen next. Reed noticed the empty knife slot. "Do you have a list of how many knives you own?" he asked. "No," Sarah said, "but that one was always there. I used it last week." Reed nodded. "We'll need to search the rest of the house if that's okay." Sarah agreed. The officers walked through every room, but they didn't find anything else unusual. After the search, they all sat in the living room. Detective Harris said, "Right now, we can't arrest your husband. He hasn't committed a crime. But we're taking this seriously. We'll keep a record of this report. If anything happens, we'll have this as evidence." Reed added, "Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight?" Sarah looked at Emma. Emma said, "She can stay with me." The detectives nodded. Harris said, "That's a good idea. If your husband comes back, let us know. We'll keep a watch on him quietly." Sarah packed some more things and left with Emma. She didn't want to stay in that house another minute. At Emma's place, things felt calmer. The guest room was simple and quiet. Sarah finally lay down on the bed and tried to rest. But her mind wouldn't stop. She kept hearing Michael's voice in her head. She remembered all the things he had said during the past few months. Small things that didn't matter before, but now felt important. Once he had joked, "Writers are dangerous people. We kill for a living on paper." Another time he said, "If something ever happened to you, I'd never be able to write again. You inspire all my work." Back then, those words sounded romantic. Now they sounded like warnings. Sarah checked her phone again. No messages from Michael. He was supposed to return today. Maybe he was already on his way. Maybe he was already in town. She wondered, did he know she had read the stories? Did he guess she had been inside the study? Then her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You always liked the kitchen, but maybe the bedroom will be better. What do you think?" Sarah froze. No name, no signature, but she knew. It was Michael, and he knew everything. Sarah stared at her phone screen. The message was short, but it chilled her to the bone. "You always liked the kitchen, but maybe the bedroom will be better. What do you think?" It was clear now. Michael knew she had been inside the study. He knew she had read the stories, and he wasn't trying to hide anymore. She quickly showed the message to Emma. Emma's face turned pale. "He's watching you," she said. "He knows where you are or what you've done." Sarah felt fear rising in her chest again. "How does he know I saw the stories? I was careful." Emma thought for a second. Maybe he had some kind of camera in the room, or maybe he noticed the papers were moved. Sarah tried to think back. Had she put everything back the same way? Had she missed something? Possibly. But it didn't matter anymore. He knew. That evening, they went back to the police station with the phone. Detective Reed took the phone and read the message carefully. "Still not a direct threat," he said. "But it's definitely not normal. We'll try to trace this number." Sarah asked, "Can I get protection? Like a restraining order or something?" Detective Harris stepped in. "We can't give a restraining order unless there's a clear threat or an act of violence. But we'll keep an eye on him. And we'll ask an officer to patrol near your house and Emma's neighborhood." Sarah didn't feel much safer, but she thanked them and returned to Emma's apartment. That night, she locked the door and pushed a chair under the doorknob. She left the lights on. She lay in bed but couldn't sleep. Her heart kept beating fast. Every sound outside made her sit up. She kept checking her phone for more messages. Around 2 a.m., her phone buzzed again. A new message. This one said, "The endings were only the beginning." Sarah didn't reply. She turned off her phone and placed it under her pillow. She stared at the ceiling and thought, why is he doing this? Why write those stories? Why plan something like this? She remembered how they met, how kind and sweet Michael had been, how they used to walk by the lake, laugh over silly jokes, plan their future. He never raised his voice. He always remembered her favorite tea. How did that same man become this cold stranger? By morning, she had made a decision. She couldn't just hide and wait anymore. She had to know what he wanted. She had to understand the truth. She needed answers, not just fear. Emma supported her. "If you want to talk to him, I'll come with you. Or we can do it over a video call." Sarah thought for a moment. No. If he really wants to do something, he won't say it over a call. "I'll go to him, but I won't go alone. I'll wear a recorder. I'll carry a panic button. The police can be nearby listening. That way we'll have real proof if he says something." They discussed the plan with Detective Reed. He agreed, but only if they followed all safety steps. "You'll wear a wire. We'll be listening from a van nearby. The moment he says anything dangerous, we'll step in." Sarah nodded. Her hands were cold, but she was ready. Later that afternoon, they arranged the meeting. Sarah sent Michael a message from a new number. "We need to talk, face to face. Just you and me. Meet me at the cabin tomorrow." The cabin was a small place they had used for weekend trips, far from town. Quiet, private. But Sarah would not be alone this time. The police would be there too. Michael replied within minutes. "I was hoping you'd say that." The message didn't have anger. It didn't have love either. Just calm words. Too calm. Sarah packed a bag. Not with clothes. With tools to stay alive. A small voice recorder. Personal alarm. a hidden phone. She also wore a thin bracelet with a tracker given by the police. The next day she would face him, the man she had loved, the man she now feared, and maybe the man who had already written her ending. The next morning, Sarah stood outside the old wooden cabin. The sun had just come up, casting a golden light across the trees. The air was cold and still. She was early. The police had already arrived an hour before and were hiding in a van parked behind the trees. She couldn't see them, but she knew they were there, listening carefully through the hidden microphone she wore under her coat. She opened the door to the cabin and stepped inside. It smelled like dust and old wood. The last time she had been here was almost a year ago, when she and Michael had celebrated their anniversary. She remembered the dinner, the music, and the way he held her hand. It was hard to believe that the same man might now want to hurt her. She sat on the edge of the couch and looked around. Everything looked the same as before. There was a small table in the corner, a fireplace with ashes still inside, and a bookshelf with a few old novels. Nothing strange, nothing scary, but still her heart was beating faster. 15 minutes passed. Then she heard the sound of tires on gravel. A car. She walked to the window and saw Michael's black car stop near the trees. He stepped out slowly and looked around. He didn't carry anything in his hands. He looked calm. He was wearing a brown jacket and jeans, just like any normal day. He walked up to the door and opened it gently. "Hi, Sarah," he said, smiling. "It's good to see you again." Sarah gave a small nod. "Hi, Michael. Thanks for coming." He walked in and looked around the cabin. "It hasn't changed, has it?" "No," she said. "Still the same." He sat down across from her. There was a short silence between them. Then Sarah asked, "Why did you write those stories?" Michael leaned back and folded his hands. "You always liked my writing, didn't you?" "That's not what I asked," she said softly. "You wrote stories where I died, in every one, and now you send me strange messages. Why?" Michael smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. "Because it's the only way I can be honest." She looked confused. "Honest about what?" "Our marriage," he said. "It's broken, Sarah. You don't see it, but I do. I write to understand things, to make sense of them. I needed to see what would happen if I finally let go." "Let go? By killing me?" she said. He shook his head. "I never said I would. I only imagined it, in 100 different ways. It helped me feel free." Sarah's voice was low. "That's not normal, Michael. You wrote about poisoning me, drowning me, even pushing me off a cliff." "I didn't do those things," he said. "I only wrote about them." "But you sent me a message," she said. "You watched me. You knew I was in your study. I knew you would look eventually. That's why I left the stories where you could find them." Sarah stared at him. "So, you wanted me to read them?" Michael nodded. "I needed you to understand how I feel, how trapped I felt, and how much you control me without even knowing it." Sarah was silent for a moment. Then she said, "You could have talked to me. You could have asked for a divorce. But instead, you scared me." Michael's voice changed. It became sharper. You wouldn't have let me go. You would have cried. You would have begged. And I would have stayed. Miserable. So I needed another way. Sarah reached into her pocket and pressed the panic button. The signal would alert the police that things were getting dangerous. Michael leaned forward. You still don't understand, do you? I didn't write those endings for fun. I wrote them to prepare. Sarah stood up slowly. Prepare for what? Michael looked her in the eye. For the day I'd stop writing and start acting. At that moment, the front door burst open. 2 officers rushed in, shouting for Michael to stay where he was. He didn't move. He raised his hands slowly, a calm look still on his face. One officer pulled Sarah back. The other handcuffed Michael. He didn't fight. He didn't say anything else. As they took him outside, Sarah stood frozen. Her legs felt weak, but she stayed on her feet. She had done it. She had faced him. She had made him speak the truth. But the words he said still echoed in her mind. I wrote them to prepare. What had he really planned? Had he truly intended to kill her? Or was it all just a sick game in his mind? The answers weren't clear. But one thing was certain now, his stories weren't just stories. They were a window into something much darker. Something that had been growing inside him for a long time. After Michael was taken away by the police, Sarah stayed inside the cabin for a while. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't cry. She just stood there, thinking about everything he had said. His words felt heavy in her mind, like a dark cloud she couldn't escape from. The man she once loved deeply, the man who once made her feel safe, had turned into someone she could no longer understand. Later that day, Sarah was taken to the police station. They asked her more questions about the stories, the messages, and everything she had experienced over the last few weeks. She told them everything honestly. She even gave them the original manuscripts, the voice messages, and the note that had been left on her pillow. The police were concerned. They didn't just see this as a small case. It wasn't just about threats anymore, it was about emotional damage, mental health, and possible danger. One officer, Detective Carter, took a special interest in the case. He had handled many similar cases before, but something about Michael's behavior seemed different to him. It wasn't just a man who was angry or jealous. It was something deeper. Detective Carter asked Sarah if she would be willing to help them continue the investigation. He wanted to know more about Michael's writing history, his past books, and his mental state. Sarah agreed. She didn't want anyone else to go through what she had gone through. Over the next few days, she worked closely with the police. She gave them access to Michael's computer, his notebooks, even his old diaries. And what they found shocked everyone. In Michael's private journals, there were notes written in a different style. These weren't stories, they were thoughts, personal thoughts. Some of them were disturbing. He wrote about feeling empty, about pretending to be happy, about hiding his real self behind a smile. He also mentioned Sarah many times. First with love, then with confusion, and finally with anger. One line stood out. It was written just a month before Sarah had found the locked room. She doesn't see me anymore. I am a ghost in this house. Maybe if I disappear, she'll finally notice. This line made the detective pause. He showed it to Sarah. She read it slowly and sat in silence. Maybe this was the beginning of everything. Maybe this was the moment Michael stopped being her husband and became someone else entirely. As they continued reading, they found something even stranger. A small file, hidden deep in his laptop, labeled Project Endings. Inside the file were short notes about each story he had written, almost like a plan. There were comments like, "Too slow," "Rewrite the poison scene," or "Make the drowning seem more like an accident." But then there was something else, a list, a real-life list, places, dates, items. One part of the list said, cabin key hidden under the flower pot. Sarah's sleeping pills, increased dosage. Backup plan, fishing trip, lake route ready. These were not just fictional ideas. These were real things, real steps. This confirmed that at least one of those stories was not just a fantasy. It was a plan. Sarah felt a cold fear settle in her chest. She had been so close to real danger, and she hadn't even known it. The man who kissed her every night before bed had been planning something in silence. Detective Carter asked if any of the places or items on the list sounded familiar. Sarah nodded. She remembered that flower pot. She remembered the time Michael suggested a fishing trip, even though he didn't like fishing. And once, a few months ago, she felt unusually sleepy after dinner. At the time, she thought it was just stress. Now she wasn't so sure. The police kept Michael in custody while they built a stronger case. They called in a mental health expert to talk to him. But Michael refused to speak. He didn't say a word to anyone. He just stared at the walls of his cell, sometimes smiling to himself, sometimes writing invisible letters in the air with his finger. Sarah, meanwhile, tried to return to her normal life. But everything felt different now. She couldn't sleep well. She kept checking the doors and windows at night. Every sound made her jump. And even though Michael was in jail, she felt like he was still watching her somehow. Then one day she received a letter. It was sent to her home, no return address. The writing was familiar. It was Michael's handwriting. She opened it slowly, her hands shaking again. The letter was short. "You chose this ending. But the book is not finished yet. There is always a final chapter." Sarah dropped the letter. Her heart raced. What did it mean? Was it a threat? A warning? Or just another trick? The police took the letter for analysis. But Sarah knew one thing for sure. Michael hadn't let go. Not yet. And maybe, just maybe, the final chapter was still waiting to be written. Sarah sat quietly in her living room, the letter lying on the table in front of her. The words kept repeating in her mind. "You chose this ending, but the book is not finished yet. There is always a final chapter." It felt like Michael was still playing a game, still writing his story. Even from jail. Detective Carter told her not to panic. He explained that sometimes people like Michael used letters to keep control. They wanted to make others feel scared, confused, or powerless. The letter didn't mean Michael had any real way to hurt her now. But still, Sarah couldn't feel safe. It wasn't just about her body anymore, it was about her mind. Michael had entered her thoughts, and now he lived there like a shadow that wouldn't leave. Sarah started therapy. Her therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Elaine, listened to everything. She helped Sarah understand that Michael had been deeply troubled. She explained how some people, especially creative ones like writers, can become lost between fiction and reality. Michael didn't just write dark stories. He had begun to live in them. He believed them. That made him dangerous. Dr. Elaine gave Sarah exercises to help her feel strong again. She reminded her that just because Michael had planned something didn't mean it had happened. Sarah had saved herself. She had found the manuscripts, called the police, and told the truth. She wasn't weak. She had taken action when it mattered most. But there were still questions in Sarah's mind. One of them kept growing louder. Why? Why did he turn like this? So Sarah asked Detective Carter to meet her. They sat in a small cafe near the police station. It was raining lightly outside. She looked at him and asked, "Can I see him one last time? Not for long. Just once. I need answers." The detective hesitated. He didn't want her to get hurt again, not even emotionally. But after a long pause, he agreed. 10 minutes, he said, and I'll be in the room too. A few days later, Sarah walked into the visitor's room at the prison. Michael was brought in. He looked thinner, older, tired, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. He smiled, not like a husband, but like a writer who had just seen a twist in his own story. "Sarah," he said softly, "I knew you'd come." Sarah didn't smile. She looked at him with calm eyes and said, "I need to understand. Why did you do all this? The stories, the endings, the message you left me. Was any of our life real to you?" Michael leaned forward. "You were always real, but the world, the life, it started to feel fake. I couldn't write happy stories anymore. I couldn't believe in them. I felt like a ghost in our house, watching you live while I was fading. So I wrote. I gave us new endings. I wanted you to feel something again." Sarah asked, "Were you really going to hurt me?" Michael looked down. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he whispered, "I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But I liked knowing that I could." Those words hit Sarah like a wave of cold water. She stood up slowly. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just said, "That's not love. That's fear. And I'm done living in fear." She walked out of the room without looking back. After that meeting, Sarah felt different. She wasn't healed, but she had faced her fear directly. Michael couldn't control her anymore. He had no more chapters to write. That part of her life was closed. But something strange happened 2 weeks later. Sarah received a call from Detective Carter. "There's something you should see," he said. He handed her a package, wrapped in plain brown paper. It had been sent from a small publishing house, one that Michael had worked with years ago. Inside the package was a book, a finished printed book. The title read, "The Final Draft." She opened it. The author's name was listed as M. Blackwood, Michael's pen name. It was a full novel, not just pieces, not just pages. And on the very first page it said, "For Sarah, the ending you chose." Sarah began reading. The story was about a man and a woman. a love that had become broken, a home filled with secrets, a locked room. The woman in the book was clearly her. The man was clearly Michael. But the twist was different. In this version, the woman becomes the writer. She takes over the story. She escapes not by hiding, but by writing her own ending. Sarah closed the book. Her hands were trembling again, but this time not from fear. Maybe this was Michael's last gift. Or maybe it was another mind game. But either way, she decided something important that night. She would write her own book. Not about Michael. Not about fear. But about survival. About truth. About becoming her own author. And so she picked up a pen. And she wrote her first sentence. I am no longer the story. I am the storyteller. Sarah had started writing, not just to forget Michael, but to understand herself better. Each morning, she sat near her window with a cup of coffee, a pen in her hand, and a notebook in front of her. The pages slowly filled with words, not of fear, but of strength, pain, hope, and healing. At first, she wrote about her past. About how she met Michael, about how love turned into silence. Then she wrote about the fear, the strange manuscripts, and the locked door. But most of all, she wrote about the moment she found her voice again. For years, she had lived quietly, letting Michael's words shape their world. Now she was shaping her own. Her therapist, Dr. Elaine, encouraged her to keep writing. She said, Sarah, you are not just healing yourself. One day, your story might help someone else. Sarah hadn't thought about that. Could her pain become someone else's hope? She decided to turn her story into a book. But this time, the book would not be fiction. It would be real. Raw, honest, a memoir of a woman who walked through fear and came out stronger. She gave the book a title that felt right, The Locked Chapter. As Sarah worked on the book, her life also began to change. She started teaching part-time at a local college, helping young writers find their voices. First, she was nervous. But the students loved her because she spoke simply and from the heart. She wasn't trying to be perfect. She was trying to be real. One day, during a writing workshop, a student asked, "How do you know when your story is finished?" Sarah smiled and said, "It's never really finished, but when it stops hurting to tell it, that's when you know it's ready to be shared." Months passed, and Sarah finished her manuscript. She sent it to a few publishers. Most didn't respond, but one small publishing house wrote back. They said her story was powerful, honest, and important. They wanted to publish it. When the book came out, it didn't become a bestseller right away. But slowly, people started reading it. Some wrote letters to her, saying things like, "Your story helped me leave a dangerous relationship," or, "I didn't know how to describe my fear until I read your book." Sarah read each message carefully. She saved them all in a wooden box. That box became a symbol for her. It reminded her that even broken chapters can lead to strong endings. Years later, Sarah visited a bookstore where her book was kept on a shelf. A young woman was holding it in her hands. Sarah walked past without saying who she was. But as she left the store, she felt a deep peace inside. Her story was out in the world now. Not locked away, not hidden, shared. Back at home, Sarah opened her journal and wrote something new. Stories do not always begin with love or end with fear. Sometimes they begin with fear and end with freedom. And that was her truth. Sarah no longer looked over her shoulder. She no longer feared locked doors. Because she had learned something powerful: what is written can be rewritten, and what is broken can be rebuilt. And she, once a character in someone else's dark story, had now become the author of her own bright future. Sometimes the first step toward it is simply looking up and daring to see the truth. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the story and learned something new today. If you'd like to read the full story again or share it with others, you can download the PDF version of this audiobook for free. Just click the link in the description below and get your copy now. Keep learning and stay tuned for more stories to improve your English. Happy reading!